As for the other big stories of 2015, we had a meeting, came up with a list, decided we could probably address all of them in one 24-hour marathon, but since we have shopping to do and only 12 minutes of TV time, we've narrowed it down to the stories which interest me the most, and I hope you do. Joining me are Nancy Gertner, former judge for the U.S. District Court of Massachusetts. Good to see you, Judge.
Nice to be here.
Shirley Leung, business columnist for the Boston Globe. Hi, Shirley. Bruce Tarr is a Republican state senator and minority leader. Senator, it's good to see you as well. Let's start by discussing the end of discussion in the place you'd least expected, that's college campuses. When protests on the University of Missouri campus over issues of race and leadership arose, there was an attempt to shut reporters out. At Yale, protests began following an email exchange in which a faculty member questioned rules surrounding students' Halloween costumes and whether it wouldn't be better to talk about them rather than just to ban them. Students called for her to be fired. And then Harvard may have won it all with their holiday placemat for social justice, which suggested how students respond to family members when contentious issues like the refugee crisis and, yes, campus protests come up. Judge, let me start with you. Are we making too much about this? This is really upsetting to me. Is this an aberration, or is this a cause for pretty great concern?
I don't think it's a cause for concern. I know that there are some people who think that. It has started a debate. It started a discussion. Is it appropriate to talk in this way? Is it appropriate to have these placemats? Is it appropriate to have civility codes on campuses given it's a small community? What's wrong with that? The notion that these discussions are shutting down discussions is ridiculous.
Yeah, but when you say civility on college campuses, my recollection of being in college ages ago is no one's there to protect me when I get out 3 years later. So if there was a microaggression or something else, you got to live in the real world when you get out of there.
What's interesting is that the whole question of trigger warnings has triggered a discussion about trigger warnings, which is exactly what you're talking about. So the notion that some people are saying you should be cautious in front of other people who may have been victims, I don't have any problem with admonishing people to do that. I would have problems with firing people if they didn't.
That's what the students asked for at Yale.
Right, but they were students and they're asking for it. I asked for lots of stuff when I was a student.
Are you with the judge on this? Shirley Leung?
Yeah, I mean, what to me, with all these protests, for me the bigger issue is, I know it's been about, free speech and what we do, but to me it's we don't know how to talk about race in America. I mean, I feel like it's, whether old or young, we're not comfortable talking about race and dealing with racial incidents, and I think that's really the bigger issue.
Well, we're not allowed to talk about it at Yale because if you wear a certain mask that may be offensive, then you're going to be in serious trouble.
Right, but I feel like the underlying factors are that we don't talk about it enough, and we're not comfortable, and that's what's causing all these rules.
You have the final word on this, Senator.
Well, I think, first of all, that free speech is the bedrock of our democracy and our society, and college campuses, like everywhere else, should foster that. But they cross the line if they make a situation that's felt to be hostile or dangerous to people who are on the campus. That's the balance they've got to achieve. We should expect them to achieve it.
Three very rational people, I should say. We're going to go to a place where you're probably more comfortable. Let's go to the courtroom and we'll take you to the sentencing of Jahar Tsarnaev to death earlier this year in federal court. No footage because there are no cameras allowed in the courtroom. There was a guy who I assume would be on board my position, let cameras in, let the sunshine in, who was with me a couple of weeks ago, but he too had some doubts. Here he is.
I'm nervous about it. I don't know what the changes would be. I don't want to be the one who is responsible for the court doing worse.
Obviously, Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, Stephen Breyer from Cambridge. Can you give me any argument, former federal judge, why there shouldn't be a camera in the courtroom where you served for years and years?
None whatsoever.
So why is he saying this?
Well, the hubris of this is, first of all, there have been cameras in the state courts for 40 years. And the state courts deal with rape, murder, and things that are much more incendiary than the federal court. But the worst of it is the Tsarnaev jury selection, in which the entire world was interested, and the Globe had sued actually to get access to the jurors' names and the voir dire. That is still sealed 8 months after the trial is closed. This is more than just no cameras in the courtroom. This is no First Amendment.
And incidentally, Congress could fix this if they chose, not the Supreme Court. If you guys, do you agree with her?
I don't see any reason not to have cameras, Jim, and I'll tell you the risk that I think that we run in not having them is every single thing from a design that's done by a courtroom artist to an interpretation of a reporter is an interpretation, and it's not exactly what's happening. That's a huge risk to take.
You want to make it unanimous?
Yes, and I mean, I was going to say, remember when we were at the Gertner trial, but at the same time, Aaron Hernandez was on trial in the state.
Yes.
And so that was on TV. And I felt that there was so much going on in the Gertner trial. I wanted to watch it. I wanted to feel what was
Being
going on.
prosecuted in our name, by the way.
Right, and I had to read it through. I mean, it was so emotional just reading the stories. I just couldn't imagine if I saw it on TV. It
Whitey
resonated.
Bulger, Sal DeMacy, same thing as compared to, as you say, Hernandez. I want to go to another issue in the courts that you actually had some involvement in right after you were elected. Philip Chisholm was just convicted for a murder of this beloved teacher, Colleen Ritzer. He was 14 years old when he did it. When Eddie O'Brien stabbed his best friend's next-door neighbor's mother 98 times in Somerville a decade or so ago, the legislature, just after you came in, lowered the age for people to be mandatorily tried as adults for murder to 14 years old. Have you rethought that with all this kind of science saying the brain is not fully developed when you're a 14, 15, or 16-year-old senator?
I've thought about it only through the lens of what we should do in order to consider those folks as juveniles, and I think we've got a long way to go, Jim. That science is still developing. For instance, a lot of it says that the brain isn't fully formed until you're 25 years old. Well, if that's true, we've got a lot of things to rethink, like the voting age and the age when you can consume alcohol.
But it's more
and a
fully
whole host
formed
of
at
things.
19 and 20, which is the age the governor of Connecticut wants you to be considered still as a minor for. By the way, giving discretion to people like her. Why shouldn't Judge Gertner and her colleagues be able to say, based on the merits, he should be tried as a juvenile, she should be tried as an adult? Why do you have to decide?
Well, we have to decide because there has to be a rule somewhere. There has to be a line somewhere, and there's plenty of room to modify the system. In fact, Jim, in 2014, we established a commission to look at this very issue that's still working on it, to say if someone is going to get the benefit of being a juvenile, what should be the factors to be considered? And by the way, that framework was also incorporated in the Miller versus Alabama decision, which got us to the place we're currently at in this country.
That you can't do life in prison without parole for a juvenile.
But the Miller court referenced factors that could be considered in the formation of a juvenile brain that should be taken into account. I don't disagree with that, but I think you got to have a line somewhere to work from.
I assume you disagree.
I totally disagree. The factors that the court described in Miller were the factors that a judge should take into account. That was the whole idea. There's a range of behavior that a judge should take into account. You cannot assume that juveniles of a certain age have a mature brain when they don't. And it really affects everything. It affects the notion of how perfectible they be, how they can improve, how they can change. And that the idea would be that in a suitable proceeding, a judge can consider all of those factors and has to be able to consider that, as opposed to regarding them as the same, as the functional equivalent of an adult.
But wouldn't they, if the court were here, I'll speak for the court at the moment since they're not with us at the moment, they would say we did take that into effect, sort of hearkening back to what he said. Yes, they can still get life in prison, but if they're a minor, they can't be denied the right to have a parole hearing. That's the way they accommodate the concerns that you have. No?
Well, the state court said that you actually can't have mandatory life imprisonment
Right.
without parole. Right. And the parole, certainly giving him an opportunity for parole is better. But, you know, a year for a juvenile is not the same amount of time as a year for an adult. And so it seems to me that all the sentencing should be informed by what we understand about children. And they are, in fact, children.
You can settle the difference here.
Well, I think that that's been one of the big stories of this year, sentencing across the board, whether it's juveniles or for mandatory drug sentences. I think we need to reconsider all of it now. I mean, we have
But the whole debate is about whether people like her should have
Right.
discretion or if people like him should tell them what to do. That's the debate, essentially.
Right, that is.
Who do you trust, him or her? No, I'm serious. I mean, isn't that really the issue? Elected officials or judges?
Well, but the notion is that sentencing is an individualized kind of thing. And if I'm wrong, we could create an appeal mechanism. And if I'm wrong, I'll be criticized in the press. But if you create sort of in advance rules, there's no opportunity to remedy it.
But Jim, if
Quickly.
you don't have in advance rules, then you have no structure to the judicial system. You would just say to every judge, decide what you want individually.
How about the
in every
rules like that
case.
he wants to do in Connecticut? You're considered a minor till you're 18 or 19. However, the judge, in limited circumstances, may decide that you're an adult for purposes of this trial.
I'd like to do it in reverse, but I think it gets you to the same place. I think there still can be room for judges to make those kind of determinations. But what I'm saying is I don't want to repeal all of the guidelines. These are adult crimes. When someone commits murder, they've already formed a particular mental state, and that needs to be
But that's
acknowledged
not
in the
true.
statute.
We got to hold it there. I
That's
want to do
not
something. I wasn't with you, but I'm assuming you cried at this particular moment when Marty Walsh spoke. Here's the mayor several months ago.
But I cannot commit to putting the taxpayers at risk. If committing to signing a guarantee today is what's required to move forward, then Boston is no longer pursuing the 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games.
Remember the Olympic bid you write about?
Yes,
Okay,
it was
you're,
so sad.
You're one of my favorite columns. You wrote about 40 of these. Your columns were, is this evidence that nothing big and novel, I think was the word used, can happen in Boston? Because we're the ultimate in NIMBY types. Give us your sense. Is this emblematic of that, or is this an outlier?
I mean, this was a really, as some people go, a big bodacious idea, and we weren't ready for it. And I think a lot of that discussion is going now when we look at, we were talking about earlier, Dukakis and Will trying to do the North Rail link. Big ideas. People can't even wrap their hands around that. And what I think about now is, what if we presented the big dig now, the idea of it? I mean, would it get shot?
Well, the Green Line sounds like it's big dig part two.
Exactly,
does it not?
and people are ready to shoot it down. So I feel like it does remind me that it does hurt our chances of thinking big again.
Okay, you're a citizen of the Commonwealth. Is it impossible to do anything big anymore in Boston?
I wonder if the reason why 2024 failed was because of this past winter and the collapse of the mass transit system. I mean, there was an object lesson that the city wasn't ready for prime time. And I'm not sure that the big dig in a comparable circumstances would have failed, because that would have said, here's what we should do for the infrastructure going forward, not for some fancy game. So I wonder if that really what was going on with it.
What's the attitude amongst you guys? There are 200 of you up there. I mean, what's the lesson you take away from 2024?
Well, I want to draw the contrast, Jim, because right now there's another big idea moving forward, and that's having the Grand Prix in Boston.
South
and
Boston.
The difference is how that is coming into the public view.
Well, it's a weekend as opposed to
it is,
3
Jim,
weeks for the world.
But the methodology is different. And one of the feelings that you got with regard to 2024 was it kept changing. First it was going to be walkable. Then it was going to be spread out all over the state. First it was going to be compact. Then it was not going to be compact. And I think that folks said that there can't be public trust in something that is that variable, where you can't feel confident in a guarantee that we all are not going to be on the hook to subsidize
So you're
losses.
both saying no large lessons taken from 2024, but are you?
I mean, I think the large lesson, is that democracy matters. And I think John Fish, the original Boston 2024 chairman, talked about that was the biggest takeaway, that he should have did a better job working with the community and presenting it and getting buy-in before just unveiling it. And I think that, I do think that there are a lot of big ideas out there that aren't getting done now, and I think you saw when the Olympics went away, we stopped talking about the future of Boston, all of us. I mean, in a big kind of civic way, and I hope that we can get back to that. I mean, how to solve the middle-class housing issues here, how to fix the T. I mean, at least the Olympics brought us together to talk about that every day.
Fair enough. We got to go. Can you say that in the parking lot to these two?
Very
quickly.
The 2024 plan actually will help us to think about those things if we choose to revisit it and
shall
use it as
see.
that tool.
Judge Gertner, it's a pleasure to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Happy New Year.
Nice
Nice
to
to
see you
meet
again.
me.
Nice to see you again.
Hello, Shirley. Pleasure.
Happy holidays.
Senator Charles, great to meet you too.
Great to meet you, Jim.
Nice to see you.